Today we're going to go over how to make an iced matcha Americano. It's a refreshing drink for a sweltering day like today. There's actually two secrets that makes a difference, and this is information that you won't find anywhere else. So, as always, make sure you stay tuned and let's jump into the video. Hi, I'm Yuki, I'm the founder of Tea Life, and here we break down Japanese tea so you can become a Japanese tea expert. Before we start to make the Matcha Americano, we have to first define what exactly is a Matcha Americano because I don't think there is a proper definition to the term. It's something that evolved relatively recently, I think. It's not a traditional Japanese drink, obviously. I think there's two key concepts behind this Matcha Americano. The first one is how to make this. So when you think about like a Americano coffee, what you do is you take espresso, which is a thick form of a coffee, and you dilute it with water. So for a matcha Americano, you would do a similar thing. You'll take a thick form of the matcha and you'll dilute it with water. So the process of making the matcha Americano is something like that. The second idea is the taste itself. So when you think about Americano in a coffee, it's taking espresso, which is a very thick form of the coffee, and diluting it with water. So it's a little bit more easier to drink, a little bit more refreshing, a little bit more approachable, less intense, depending on the person. So idea here for the matcha is the exact same thing. You'll take a thicker, or we have the usucha, which is it's called thin tea preparation, but it's still a very thick form of the matcha. It might be too thick for lots of people. So the idea behind the matcha Americano is to make it even more diluted with water, make it thin, so it's a little bit more approachable, perhaps more refreshing, more diluted in terms of the intensity, so more people can drink it. So that would probably be what a matcha Americano is when you think about the definition. Okay, so how do you make this matcha Americano? It's actually very simple. We'll go step by step. First, we want to take matcha. We'll use 2 grams of matcha today, and we're going to sift it. Now, usually I don't sift this in this channel, you might know, but for the matcha Americano, we want to make sure we sift the matcha, and I'll talk about why later. Once we sift the matcha, then we want to take a little bit of water. We're going to take 20 milliliters of 80 degrees Celsius water, and then we're going to make that thick condensed matcha form. So it's going to be kind of like a matcha shot. It won't be as thick as a paste, but it's going to be a strong matcha shot that we're going to make. Now, once you have this, all you have to do is take it and pour it into the water, and then you'll have your iced matcha Americano. Now, the question is, how much water do you want to dilute this with? And this goes back to the definition of matcha Americano, because if you use too little water, then it's going to be the same as usucha. And in that case, why don't you just make it as an usucha? Because that would actually taste better. But in this case, what we want to do is we want to make it a little bit more less intense. That's the point of matcha Americano. So today we're going to dilute it with 90 milliliters of cold water. And that would give us not exactly double, but a little less than double of the amount of water you would use for a normal usucha. For the matcha today, we'll be using Wako by Mariki Koyama, which is, I'm sure many of you know as well, but it's a fantastic usucha matcha. It's a high-level usucha matcha, which is, I personally drink it sometimes as a koicha as well because it's so delicious. If I want a strong kick in my matcha, I would actually do that. But that's how good Wako is. I feel it is a little bit of a waste, maybe, to drink it as a diluted matcha Americano, but it's for the video, so let's go. Before we get into how we make this, I forgot to mention that one of the secrets to making a really good cup of matcha Americano is whether or not you use hot water or cold water to make that initial matcha shot. Now in the instructions, I already mentioned that we'll be using 80 degrees Celsius water, so I kind of gave it away, but it's actually better to use hot water or warm water, 80 degrees Celsius water, to make the initial shot of matcha for the matcha Americano. If you're following this channel, you probably know that I usually use room temperature water to make the initial matcha paste when we're making normal traditional usucha. And this is because that will make it less clumpier. It'll make it a little bit easier to mix the matcha completely into the water. However, for this matcha Americano case, it's a little bit different. What we want to do is we want to use hot water and try to use the temperature of the water to wake up the matcha. We want to extract lots of the flavors as much as possible because that's the only timing that we have to extract the flavors of the matcha. If we use cold water to make that initial shot, the extraction will be weak there. And then once we dump it into the cold water, the rest of the water, it won't really extract more of the flavors either. So overall, you're going to get a flat tasting matcha Americano as opposed to if you're using hot water, you'll have a lot more of the notes and the flavors. And when you think about matcha Americano, it's a very diluted drink in the first place. So you want to try to extract as much as the notes as possible at the early stage. So that's why we're using the 80 degrees Celsius water and a little bit more water than usual. So 20 milliliters of water to try to get a good initial extraction. And this is also the reason why we initially sifted the matcha in the first place, because we're using a little bit more water than we would normally do to make the paste. And we're also using 80 degrees water rather than room temperature water. Though matchas will tend to be a little bit more clumpy if we don't be careful. That's why initially we want to sift the matcha to make sure that it's as smooth as possible. Now, this really only works if you're using high quality matcha. So if you're using matcha like a wako that we're going to be using today, this formula will be suitable for that. However, if you're using a lower quality matcha, if you're using say a culinary grade matcha with a little bit more higher astringency, then the approach is how can you contain the stringency as much as possible? If you use warmer water temperatures, then it'll extract the stringency and you'll be able to taste the stringency quite clearly in a form like an iced matcha Americano. So you want to use lower water temperatures to mix the matcha so you can kind of hide the astringency to the maximum. Okay, now I think we're clear on the instructions, so let's make the matcha. Okay, so we're gonna open this wako and we're gonna take 2 grams of wako. And then as I mentioned, we're gonna sift it today. We'll take 80 degrees water and then we're going to pour 20 grams or 20 milliliters of 80 degrees water into the bowl. And then we will mix it. Now, since this is a very thick form of the matcha, it's not going to have too much of the microfoam. But the idea is to make sure that we mix it as much as possible. When we want to wake up, in a sense, the matcha, so lots of the flavors would come seeping out of the matcha particles. So you want to take some time here because you want to make sure that all the powder is completely dissolved, or not dissolved, but all the clumps are broken apart and suspended in the matcha. And once you feel you're ready, then all you have to do is take this and mix it into the water. So this is 90 milliliters of water. And here you have your cup of iced matcha Americano. We'll just take some ice. Oops. Oh. And then here we have our nice refreshing cup of iced matcha Americano. Okay, so here it is. Let's have a drink. Nice and refreshing. You can still taste the matcha, so the wako taste, the flavors are delicious. It's very clean and you still can get the matcha, so this is perfect. All right, so that's how you make a matcha Americano. Now, the other secret that I wanted to talk to you about is, well, in this case, we're using wako, which is, again, a very good matcha. But let's say you don't have that good of a matcha, and you have a lower grade matcha that has a little bit more prominent astringency in the taste. And there's a secret you can do to kind of reduce that astringency if you add a little bit of sweetener. And it's an amount where the sweetness itself is not noticeable. So just a little bit of sweetener, whether it be sugar or syrup or whatnot. If it's a syrup, maybe like half a gram, something like that. So it's a very small amount where you don't feel the taste. You don't taste the taste of the sweetener or the sweetness of the sweetener. Although you won't be able to taste the sweetness from the sweetener will act as something that reduces the harshness and the astringency of the matcha quite well. So it will drastically reduce the astringency and it will make the matcha feel like it's a few grades higher than what it used to be. So that's very effective for a matcha Americano. Of course, the downside is that you'll be using some sugar. So if you're drinking for health benefits, if that's the main objective of drinking matcha in the first place, that's not something that I would recommend. But if you're just trying to drink matcha because you like matcha, then maybe that's a way to kind of, hide some of the weaknesses of the matcha. So there we go. That's how you make an iced matcha Americano. I hope you like it. I hope you can try because it's been very hot these days. It'll be a nice refreshing drink that will be suitable for this weather. I'll see you in the next video.